So I think we spoke a little bit last week about sense foraging, and it's a practice that Doctors Farb and Siegel in their book Better in Every Sense point out. It's a practice that when we're feeling stuck, allows us to move from the part of our brain where we tend to be when we're in that stuck mode to a different part of our brain. And so when we're feeling stuck, we're actually in what's called the default mode network. And that's a neural system that extends from the back of the brain to the front, just like a dorsal fin. And we tend to get stuck in our heads through the brain's default mode network. And that network is a really important network. It does some wonderful things for us. It's very useful. But when we're stressed, it becomes overactive. And we end up focusing too much on thinking about our problems. I think you can probably all relate to that, which gets us stuck in our own minds, feeling stuck and that feeling of overwhelm. So, how do we actually calm the default mode network? Well, research has shown that mindfulness, so just simply being present in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and without judgment, that's mindfulness. Our meditation, our formal meditation, can help us to calm it down. Even deep breathing, we've done diaphragmatic breathing. All of these things can quiet the default mode network. Um, so, any experience of awe, such as hiking or watching the moon rise or swimming in the ocean, can take you out of your default mode network. Your focus is not on the everyday worries, but more on the big picture. And we begin to realize that we're kind of in the grand scheme. Um, we're pretty insignificant. We're just a little speck on this earth. And so it's not necessary to stew in our troubles. And it kind of points to the quote that I used today, which is the real voyage of discovery consists not of seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Marcel Proust. And so the solution to being stuck, being on overwhelm, is to practice focusing on sensation, which diverts resources from the default mode network to other parts of the brain. And then by weakening the DMN's priority, you can feel free from obsessing over your stress and you become unstuck. So it sounds simple, right? But it's a practice. Essentially, what we want to do is get out of the mind, out of our head, into our body, using these sense doors that we all have: our sight, our sound, our hearing, our touch, taste, and smell. For those of you who may have just joined us, we're going to do a mindful eating practice today at the end as our meditation. And so if you haven't brought something with you, I encourage you to just find a little nugget of something. I have some raisins. They're actually fairly old, but they work really well for mindful eating. So it can be a raisin, it can be a piece of chocolate, it can be a grape, it can be whatever you have available. So how do we sense forage? So the first step is to notice. This is what we do in our mindfulness practice, right? We notice. We notice the feeling of being overwhelmed, and you can verbalize, I am feeling overwhelmed right now. So you're acknowledging that emotional state. And this is what actually prepares us for the sense foraging practice. You can even have something that you use when you're feeling overwhelmed. The author suggests something like having a bracelet or a elastic band and taking it from one wrist to the other when you feel overwhelmed. It's kind of your signal to bring awareness to these feelings. But you can just simply say the words, I am feeling overwhelmed right now. I'm really feeling stuck. So the second part is kind of check in on your motivation. And this check-in kind of enhances curiosity, and it offers the choice to shift the lens of attention from thinking to sensing. And remind yourself in this step, I don't have to stew in this experience. I have a practice that I can use, and that's sense foraging. And that kind of helps you to spark curiosity about having a different relationship to the experience. So you can notice your level of disinterest or interest in sensory experience. It's okay to notice. I'm not very interested right now, but then you might say, but I know that this is a better alternative than ruminating over this or continuing to foster this feeling of overwhelm. And so setting your intention, we've talked about that before in our practices. It's always important to affirm your intention to commit to explore your senses more actively. And the more often you do this, the more easily you're going to be kind of attuned to the feeling of overload and attuned to what it feels like to explore your sensory field. And so the third part is simply to explore your sensory field. And folks, you can Google this practice too, and you will sense foraging, and it will come up quite readily with some steps to it. So when you're exploring, we're observing the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, and the tactile sensations. And this serves to broaden our awareness. And it kind of counters that narrow focus, that sense of constriction that is perpetuated when we're overwhelmed or we're highly stressed. And so checking in with your sight, observing visual features. You can even have like a particular photograph of a wonderful trip that you went on that reminds you of, oh, I was out in the woods and oh, I can smell the air in the woods. I can feel the crunch of my feet on the ground. You can do something like that. You can listen. For some people, listening to beautiful music might immediately take you out of your ruminative state into a more sensory state. And you might smell. You might detect subtle scents in the air, or you might just open your door or a window to what am I sensing through my sense of smell. Or you may have just had an enjoyable meal, and so taste the residue in your mouth. Even if it's unpleasant, we're again shifting our brain to sensation. And then we can engage in tactile exploration. You can, just as you're sitting here, feel the body. That this is how we go into our meditation often. We feel the touch points of our body. What is my body touching? And this, we explore sensations like, what is the temperature that I'm feeling in my body? Ah, my hands are feeling cool, but my feet are feeling a little bit warm because I have clothing on them. Feel the pressure, feel the tension. All of this takes you into a different part of your brain, the salience network, rather than the default mode network. And then part 4 is after you've done the practice, check in again. How do I feel? And this practice really highlights the vast array of things that can be noticed. And it helps us to realize that we don't have to be fixated on the challenging experience. It helps to expand our perspective. And so we often get into these kind of ruts where we feel overwhelmed and stuck. And it just becomes the experience of the moment, right? The experience du jour. And so this is a really valuable tool to really shift from that rumination and the unpleasantness that that can produce to asking the question or serving ourselves by saying, I can shift. And so all of this science is so impressive to me because for those of you who have taken the course, the mindfulness-based stress reduction course, you all know that in session 1, John Kabat-Zinn, who was the scientist that developed the curriculum for the mindfulness-based stress reduction course all the way back in 1979, the first session, he has the participants eat a raisin mindfully and do a body scan mindfully. And so this is all tapping into our sensations. And of course, all the way back in 1979, there were no fMRI machines to validate that this actually shifted part of our brain to, or shifted our brain to go into a different network. But it was known by these ancient practices. And so it's so fascinating to me today that so many years later, science validates the efficacy of these practices, how valuable they are to us in creating better health and choice around how we experience our emotions. So I want to suggest that we practice by doing something that we do every day of our life. We eat. And if you don't have something available, I had asked in the email today, but I understand if you just use the link to come in, to just find something that you can eat that is small, a finger food. Typically in the exercise, we use a raisin, but it can be almost anything. But if it can be something that's relatively savory, that has a scent to it, that probably works better than something that doesn't have a scent. But people have used grapes that don't really have much of a scent. You can use a cherry tomato. You can use almost anything. So I'll just give you just a moment to find something. And I'll tell you the story of these raisins. When I used to teach in person, I would always bring a bag of raisins like this to share with everybody in the first session. And I would hand them out very hygienically and with some tongs, etc. And I realized when we moved from one apartment to another, I still have these bags of raisins. And I thought, I don't think I want to throw them out. They're a little bit hard, they're a little bit firm. They've, seen better days. But I use these now, and it's a practice that I really enjoy. I have some of these at my desk. And when I need to get out of my head, I can just eat a raisin mindfully, and it very instantly picks up my sense of taste and smell, and it becomes a rich sensory experience. So, maybe even having something like this at your desk. It could even be if you're inclined to be very and you find senses or scents really uh, enjoyable. It may be one of those little bottles of oils that you might have at your desk so that you can just tap into it periodically. And again, we're very purposefully shifting from one network to another in our brain, becoming unstuck. And so, whatever you might have, just taking a look at it. And you can imagine that you've never ever seen this before. I'm just holding it between my thumb and my forefinger, this little raisin. And I'm just taking a look at it. You can even imagine that you're an explorer, that you've actually come from a very different planet to Earth. Now that we have space travel so readily available, right? I say that facetiously. But just imagine that you're here to explore. So you're very curious and ask the question, where did this come from? I've never seen this before. Take a look at the color. Take a look at the shape. You might ask, was it grown in the ground? Or was it made in a factory? And if it was grown in the ground, this began as just a little seed. And what nourished that little seed? Perhaps water, the soil that surrounds it, the sunlight, keeping the weeds at bay, perhaps. What nourished this? And then checking the color. What color is it? Is it smooth? Is it rough? You might even hold it up to the light. It might be transparent, or it might be translucent, or it might be opaque. Mine is kind of opaque to translucent. So just really exploring it completely. And then press on it if you can. It's a grape or a cherry tomato, it might squirt you, but for this raisin that's kind of dried up, and it's fairly malleable still, but not as malleable as it probably was initially. But just pressing on it and seeing what happens. And for mine, my raisin changes shape, completely different shape. And then taking another look at it, bringing it to your nostrils, smelling it. Notice what happens as you smell it. Is there any saliva? If there's an odor to it, is there any saliva that comes into your mouth? And notice how you might have a strong urge to just, excuse me, pop it into your mouth and chew it now. But we're first going to take it and just feel it. So in a different way than your fingers, just rubbing it lightly on your upper lip to get a sense of this, what you're going to put into your mouth. Smelling it again. Ah. And then placing it on your tongue, but don't begin to chew it yet. Just moving it around on your tongue, feeling the shape of it. Noticing perhaps the saliva that's coming into your mouth filled with digestive enzymes that are going to aid in the digestion of this thing. And when you're ready, begin to chew and chew that, chew this object until it's completely dissolved before you swallow it. Chewing it very slowly, very thoroughly. And perhaps you might be aware of the saliva that comes into your mouth. And when it's completely dissolved, then you can finally swallow it, but only when it's completely dissolved. And after you've swallowed it, you might notice little bits of it in your mouth still. And you might also notice and appreciate the residual taste in your mouth. So just enjoying this moment as you experience the taste. If there's any aroma that still lingers, maybe the touch of the residue in your mouth. And as you explore this, just feeling the breath in your body as background to this experience. and opening to other sensations in your body. Up sensations in your stomach and your digestive tract as the body prepares to digest this, whatever it was that you just ate. And you might notice your urge to perhaps take another one of these things and just see if you can stay with the experience of continuing to enjoy the aftertaste. Noticing the changes in your mouth, the different sensations in your body. Just asking the question, what am I noticing? As you continue to be aware of your breath. Perhaps asking the question, how can I incorporate mindful eating into my day? Into my life to enhance my health? And it might be by just taking one mouthful of each meal or one meal a day, where we smell our food before we put it into our mouth, where we chew it very carefully. Just one bite. And when it's really disintegrated, we swallow it. And we stay with those sensations rather than moving on to do the next bite. This is a rich practice in stopping, in being present in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. Very simple thing to do, and yet not so easy as we get into our routines and our ways of being. And so beginning to open your eyes now, stretching a little. And I'm going to invite you to put into the chat, what did you experience in that exercise? And I'll just read from the chat. What did you notice? What surprised you, maybe? Mary said, the beautiful star at the end of my olive. Ah, so a visual. Yeah. And you may not have noticed that before, right? I can take my time, Leslie says, no need to rush. Yeah, Mary says she's never noticed that. Yeah, Mariana says the urge to go on autopilot when eating, isn't that the truth? And Edward says, peaceful state. The peaceful state and deliciousness. Isn't that amazing? What we notice when we really stop and incorporate this as a practice like this. Yeah. Yeah. So, who's this? Melissa says that she's on the road and enjoyed a delicious vanilla coffee. So she didn't chew, but she enjoyed the smell. And yeah, and Leslie again said the experience of savoring is really nice. How often do we do that? And yet it's available to us. And Jacqueline said, actually smelled the piece of arugula and croissant in addition to savoring the taste. Yeah. And the iPad said appreciation, gratitude, right? Isn't it true? This very simple little raisin can provide so much in a sensory experience like this. I'm so grateful for these raisins. And perhaps something that nobody mentioned, but I just want to ask you if you noticed. Did you notice how your mind stopped thinking? Did you notice that there was this momentary pause when you didn't notice the thinking wasn't front and center any longer, but rather the senses were front and center? And so I encourage you to practice this again, do it again, and begin to notice what happens. Yeah. JD said more space between thoughts. Yeah. Notice what happens when we're really focused on our sensory awareness, because we're taking our mind into our thinking goes to the back of the stage, and our sensory awareness comes to the front of the stage. And in our brain, we're actually shifting into a different network, the salience network. And that's a pathway to the task positive network, the network where we experience calm, more peace, we're more focused. And so it's wonderful that we have the science today that can validate these practices that have been around for thousands of years. And it validates the effect that it actually has on our brain health, on our own happiness. And so I really encourage you. Melissa says, much needed. Yeah, thank you. So thank you, everybody, for participating in this. And I strongly encourage you to practice it throughout the week. I'm going to just turn off the recording.